I should have been able to. Hi. Thank you for being here. Welcome to our November reading of Observable Readings. Daisy and I are happy to be here. Very happy. Happy you all are here. It is so cool to see this room full again. I mean, truly, it's really exciting for us. I know it's very dark, very early. I get a little seasonally affected. I don't know about you, but this is brightening my spirit. So thank you for being here. Quick housekeeping. Restrooms in the back, in a little side area over there. Cash bar, tip your bartender, or dearest bartender. Yes, thank you. Doing the wave as well. I love it. So, hi again. And as I said, Lizzie and I are super happy and honored to be here. Honored to see you here. Poetry is a big deal for us and for a lot of people in this room. And being part of the St. Louis Poetry Center is a blessing to me. And I fully mean that. The community has been supportive and beautiful, and I'm glad that we can share it with you and that you're sharing it with us. So I'm gonna say a couple thank yous, as always, to Erin, quick, our fearless Erin. She's been doing a lot this whole time and helping us through every step of the way. Same to Dana, same to the rest of the St. Louis Poetry Center Program Committee and the board. And I would also like to thank our funders, those are our partners. Funders first, Missouri Arts Council, Regional Arts Council, and then St. Louis Poetry Center members. And I'll talk a little bit more about membership later on. And our partners, Hilo, Kransberg Arts Foundation, Left Bank Books. Speaking of Left Bank Books, we do have books for sale. Well, Left Bank has books for sale over. I'm gonna do the wave again. Yes, thank you. Love it. All right. And then I will give some updates at the end about some poetry community events and some St. Louis Poetry Center events coming up. But we'll do that after we get some poetry in, which I'm very, very excited about. So now I will do no flowery introduction of Lizzie, who will do an introduction of Steve, and we will see whether it's flowery or not. But either way, it's gonna be great. So here's my Lizzie.
I forget about the blue light.
Something.
So okay. So I got a little mushy for this. So I'm gonna keep the script for that reason. So my first interaction with Steve Schroeder was in 2013, and he may not remember this. I was submitting my little shitty poems to journals for the first time, and I was just, right, like when you first do it, you're really just like into the wind. And with no digital etiquette, not really understanding anything at all about like life and the world. And at the time, I was getting a lot of beautiful, beautiful, wonderful rejections back, right? And they all, right, when you're first doing it, they sting so bad. They just like hit you, those emails just hit you in the face. The template that's like, although we appreciate your interest in this journal, that kind of vibe. And yeah, people talking me down from the ledge, you know, just the tiniest, most fragile ego. And at the time, a friend of my friend was like, oh, he submitted his poems here? Okay, I'll submit some poems there too. I'll just send him, shoot that email right over, right? And it was super low taxing, right? It was like, no portal, no fees, no fuss, no muss. And then a few weeks later, I get a quick email back from the journal's name was Anti, if anybody remembers.
Woo.
Such a good journal, so good. I got that quick email back, and I did try to find it for this very day, and I could not find it because my Gmail doesn't go back that far. Or I had a different email, I don't know, some sort of weird university email. But it was something like, thanks for sending these. The first poem was close, but not quite it, and then just his name at the bottom. And at first I was like, this man will rue the day. Right? Like, I have an actual name to put my anger towards. Like, just full psychotic break happening, right? And then a year later, I moved to St. Louis, where I'm from, moved back home, and was trying to get settled in this other literary community, which is very weird to not be a part of the literary community of the community you're from. Like, it's kind of strange to be like alien in that way. I don't know, it's a weird time. And I was hearing his name around and I was like, oh, I know that name, right? So he was like here and there, all over the place. At one point he curated this very reading series. And he also worked with River Styx, where I was the managing editor at the time. He even brought Eduardo here with River Styx, so that's our huge, like, you know, full circle moment. And I would see him and I'd be like thinking that like rejection email just like lived in the back of my head every time I see him. I'd like, oh, it's Steve. And you could say maybe it's like part of, I really went wild over here in this situation. You could say it's part of my villain origin story, because I was like determined to win Steve over and get him to like at least like my personality. He doesn't have to like the poems. I was like fully invested. And I was like, I will force him to become my friend. He will read these poems, you know, and I tried really, really, really hard also to kind of, this is where it gets mushy, try to be as good of a literary citizen as Steve is, because he loves to make a thing, a community thing. He's really good at it, at putting all of the pieces together that you need to have kind of that literary community moment. So now, actually, I've kind of gone full circle also on that email, and I can see the community care in it. Now that I've gotten a lot of other rejections from a lot of other places that don't mean as much to me, but this one does. Okay, if I could, I would print it out, right, frame it and everything. Because in reality, right, it was personal. It was a personal email. It was short. He gave it to me quickly, right? I didn't wait 3 years for that rejection, right? I only had to wait like 3 weeks. So now I realize that it was in fact community care and love. And now we see him, you know, starting another online literary journal, which you're gonna have to help me out because it's just $. Is that how you say it? Yeah. So it's if you go to poetryscurrency.com, you'll see the poems. They're these beautiful. It's a very stripped down website, right? It's very anti-commercial, so it has this beautiful kind of ethos to it. And he's had poems all over the place in city parks, public transit, and he also has recently published, you know, any pandemic book like is recent, right? So, so 2 years is still very recent. All right, the air is off. So we have Wikipedia Apocalyptica, which I cannot wait for these poems. I cannot wait for him to talk about them and get into the whole world that he's created in this book, and even go into some of the poems that he's created since or before, because there's a beautiful timeline here that I'm thankful to have been able to be a part of. So, you know, without whatever, come on down.
Wow, those lights really are something, aren't they?
They are.
Thank you, Lizzie. That is possibly the nicest introduction I've ever gotten. If you have it written down, please send it to me so I can send it with the rejections I send out now, so they understand if they're good rejections. thank you all for being here. It's great to see everyone. Lizzie referenced the pandemic, and I sort of retreated a little bit at the beginning of the pandemic, and now I'm finally starting to get back out into the literary world. So this is a really good step in that. Thank you to everyone with the St. Louis Poetry Center for being so kind and for having me read, and for letting me read with Eduardo. I've known Eduardo for about 20 years now, so we go way back, and it's a delight to read with him. Due to the election, I'm going to read mostly social and political poems. Fortunately, I'm actually pretty good at those. However, I got a request for a poem. It's not a political or social poem, but I don't know if you all write, but if you get any requests, you should honor them. It doesn't happen very often. So my friend Kenneth asked me to read this poem. Kenneth does a lot of work with the Poetry Center. This is I've been doing some strange little fairy tale or fantasy kinds of poems. And this is one that used a feature of his house as a jumping off point, and also a conversation that was had at his house. It's called What's Behind the Wall Made of Doors? A painting of winter's spindly fingers, a watching window hidden from the outside. Even the widow doesn't know, and she planned the hallways leading to themselves, the leaning chairs and benches, the whole row of antique hardwood slabs, knobs and all. A cat that can't be held by ordinary cages, a secret letter written with a bitter almond accent. She had to build and build, mirrors that only show what might be catching up, escape hatches from study to kitchen to basement, decoy bedrooms to fool the nightmares full of knives. A knock that sounds like coughing, a murmured curse of unearthly restlessness. Now she lives on the third step to the attic, as chill and vertigo her family feels if they pass through. Their mastiff bristles on the landing. The house is in a jewelry drawer in a crawl space beneath the floorboards behind the right-hand door, which doesn't open, through her eyes, which never shut. All right, and now I'm going to read, here's where the political stuff starts a little bit. This is from my first book. It's called So You Want a Worker. You may only hire a worker if you promise to feed it and clean its messes. Please allow 2 to 4 weeks for delivery of your worker. Please allow your worker out of its metal crate twice a day for exercise. If you turn the heat up slowly, your worker will not attempt escape. You may only redeem your worker for store credit with a receipt. Your worker must be this tall to board the corporate jet. You may not carry your worker in your briefcase. Your worker will not attack itself in the mirror if you're watching. Do not bite your worker back. Wagers on your worker fighting are legal in international waters. Your worker is licensed for Florida and Indiana only. In India, your worker is a delicacy or sacred, maybe both. Your worker does not contain tasty candy bars for vending. The 10th time you use your worker, you earn a free drink. No, you may not buy another worker. You don't pay the one you have. Your worker will stare up at dropping stocks until it drowns. When your worker dies, bury it after you leave it in the freezer at least a year. Do not flush your worker. All right, and this one is from my second book. The title is Working Poor, to Use a Vulgar Expression, which is a quote from Thomas Malthus. Poverty is not a genetic trait, but a lifestyle choice, not about slavery, but states' rights and taxation, not a crime of desire, but power and control. Poverty is 10 times likelier at home than in the workplace, the leading cause of schoolyard insult rhymes worldwide, popular among key demographics advertisers covet. A more tasteful term for poverty might be collateral damage, revenue adjustment on the highway to economic hope, society's last penny put down on the railroad track. Coins dropped off skyscrapers fall fast enough to kill poverty. Coins stacked as high as skyscrapers could pay for poverty. All coins in the United States contain traces of poverty. The next coin flip is due to come up prosperity. And I'm going to read a few newer poems that are not in a book yet. I actually told someone I wasn't going to read this because it's pretty over the top, even compared to some of the other ones I'll be reading. But then I decided we're sort of in a time that calls for it. Every time I try to write something absurd, the world just outdoes it. So I just have to keep getting more and more absurd. I used to really be obsessed with eating challenges where they, eat as much as possible, and there's just this gross gluttony. And I also used to think I could totally do one of those. I'm old enough now that I definitely can't. So that was a jumping off point for this, and I guess America in general at the moment. It's called If You Call This a Challenge. The challenge is to die by chocolate to your face. The challenge is deep fried 5-pound slabs of apple pie smothered in peanut butter, bourbon, and lit on fire. The challenge is stuffed full of life and into no lie. Doubled, tripled, hyped up, electrified, shotgunned, and delivered by dump truck. We topped the challenge with $10,000 of Ultra Fun Club bucks, a mini American flag, a mandatory waiver form, plus, what the fuck, a dozen chicken nuggets. Only take the challenge as directed by a doctor. Do not take the challenge if you're pregnant, impotent, a communist, allergic to awesome, or just unable to carry your own weight. If you experience loss of appetite, bankruptcy, anti-capitalist activism, or any resistance whatsoever to your consumer duties, stop the challenge at once and seek professional help. The challenge cannot be held liable for itself. All right, this is another one sort of in the same series of poems. It's called Proper Operation of Our Prayers. Our prayers will be heard. Our prayers need a reason. Say our prayers are for the hunt. Our prayers are for protection. Our prayers are part of your arms. Wear our prayers near your heart like a badge. Carry our prayers in your heart like a grudge. For safety, sleep with our prayers under your pillow in one hand. Never point our prayers anywhere you don't want to hit. Always aim our prayers center mass. To touch people most, ensure our prayers are rapid fire. Afterward, scour and scrape, and God damn it, why won't our prayers come clean? Reject any who claim our prayers will less likely end in your defense than turned against yourself. If our prayers get caught in your throat, don't choke. Our prayers will be heard. All right, and this is one more in the same series. Dana, this is the one that you remembered. It's called An Open Letter About Our Happiness. The jumping off for this is I like to read online reviews of products that I'm not even interested in just because sometimes they're insane and hilarious. An open letter about our happiness. In our opinion, happiness is great on paper. Our happiness, however, waited half an hour to serve us without a smile. Happiness fit tighter than expected. On one hand, we literally didn't find happiness likable, relatable, or even believable. On the other, happiness was hot. On another hand, perhaps too hot. Happiness tried so hard it made us sweat. We felt happiness lacked scope and flair and bite, not to mention leather footrests with massagers or a mountaintop worth the climb up. Overall, happiness rated less than the sum of its pluses and many minuses, 1.5 out of 5, a semi-adequate slapdash offering we might not recommend to friends. Happiness didn't stick the landing. In light of this constructive feedback, we better get our happiness for free. All right, and now I'm going to switch over to several poems from the most recent book. And the first one, this is sort of what I pictured the upcoming presidential inauguration to be like. Outside view of the victory festivities. Each mouth in the crowd launches a fighter jet. Every confetti flutter represents as much potential energy as an artillery shell made good. More stars than on all the the souvenir flags, more parts to a salute than anyone knows. Overturned and burning cars insist no I in team. Lotteries choose what boys become exiles next. Place where the award for heroism goes to pieces too small to recognize, where leaders sacrifice bodies by the score to slow their own fall off the dais. Disciplined into stone for days without twitching or breath, watchers still watch with both eyes closed. To reach an enemy's heart at such distance, a single finger touch. This country wants winners. And this one is called Cryonics in the Time of Climate Change. Here, the deep chamber where people dream of remember when. There, a bed where couples who sleep through slow estrangement won't know their own lives overgrown by every moment taken for granted. Month after irreconcilable month drops off the calendar and makes the floor slippery with promises. That no two arguments are identical is a myth. The 50 different phrases for saying should have said, a misconception. Past that door, signs warn, best if opened before this date, please do not ignore the signs. Outside insulated windows, the new calamity is happening to somebody. This is official statement. Video of the incident, edited, almost obeyed our order, almost made our story fit. A citizen, no, criminal, was pacified by multiple blunt instruments of the state. Of course, by mistake, in our hasty press release, justice became just trust us. The system remained utmost. The sole witness investigators interrogated, no, interviewed, didn't see what she saw or say what she said. Any direct eye contact caused us to lose count of who got lost. To stand up was obstruction. To back away, a credible threat. The subject, no, suspect, didn't look right while jaywalking, then ran for what he must have believed was safety, so we saved him from himself. When we searched his person afterward, each pocket hid a brick. In his hands, toy resembled gun, or perhaps the other way around. In our hands, his life amounted to vacant housing taped off, his blood on blacktop, too dark to identify. In our minds, the boy was not boy, but man, and that man grew into monster, and that monster outnumbered us less than a second before we remembered our gun was more than one, too. The city was like that when we found it, no, founded it, no, foundered it. Once we met the boy, he was already dead, though his body didn't know yet. All right, this one's called The News. 50% of our marriages ended in stalemate, the rest in restaurants. We all tested above average as drivers, a phenomenon known online for its leap the median meme. A pie chart infographic showcased pie shortfalls with an empty piece bigger than 6 o'clock. On what remained of Main Street, the most popular building styles were brutal and Beirut. Behind our poor investments hid the Swiss, according to reports that turned precision into a slur. More employers hired mountain men and women than financiers and lawyers, whose numbers we had financed longer than the law allowed. The trend where workers threw themselves in front of a bullet train shocked the stock market. In a survey, area hospitals estimated railroad-related fatalities at 100 possibilities, from none to untracked. The top tactic to cope with sorrow started with cans of chocolate frosting. 9 out of 10 dentists were identified by dental records. The 10th dentist was identified by investigators as a person of interest and an alleged pediatric practitioner. If we took the black medicine, nothing bad would happen. If we flipped the black switch to obey, something bad would happen to a stranger in a soundproof room. In mirrors, ambulance became danger. One cure for our hunger required a runaway dump truck. After the break, the Indians won and thunderstorms were coming. All right, the last three political poems here, these are all very, very much inspired by the current political climate. I think you'll probably be able to tell that. The first one is called Portents. Pain in our arthritic joints meant rain. A forked branch's twitch meant clean groundwater. The safety inspector who passed away after testing what trickled thick and rusty as blood from wells during the drought months could have meant anything by unfit for human consumption. If we found a penny on the sidewalk, strangers would be coming to town. If we found any foreign coins, misfortune would soon follow. When a 4-year-old was lost exploring the quarry, despite the signs we posted with the clear warning, no hope to prevent this, strangers took the blame. The first time a patient took sick with the shakes after the doctor started selling nerve tonic as a cure-all, we called that case wait and see. The second was both sides of the story. The third, isolated incident. The situation where 12 fell from the church stairway built of spackle and prayers with a blank check and a no-bid contract we ignored as according to plan or agreed to decide hadn't happened. We all dreamed the same dream, that we somehow elected mayor, a literal feral cur, and council members now went missing. Waking, we knew the truth was, give him a chance. After the newspaper editor's suicide by ice pick to the back of the neck led to the headline, how many lives would it take before you believe? Our answer turned out to be every single fucking one and more. And this one is about a very American pastime, bootlicking. It's called Yes Man. The boss innovated the winning yes one of us mentioned yesterday, displayed our original yes in case we misremembered our place, insisted yes precede us at meetings, expected nothing less than yes plus half a pumpkin muffin on his desk before he asked. Yes didn't protest lottery ticket Christmas bonuses. Yes lacked the skill to assess its lack of skills. Our aspiration to be boss necessitated yes mandatory morale-boosting posters of sharks and astronauts, offices of increasing senselessness, eyeglass-like devices to microanalyze our voice and posture, access control systems based on genetic tests. Yes, didn't resist being piled high enough to bypass all walls. Yes, expanded to fill the time available. In lawsuits, the boss suggested we testify yes was safe if ingested, was fine containing greater than trace amounts of asbestos and lead, was normal despite paralysis in lab mice, made sense classified as recyclable instead of medical waste. Yes, didn't question messaging new history into existence. Yes, adjusted its answers as it guessed the experiment's goal. The boss passed on the title of boss to the boss. So yes, reassessed its use for us, right-sized the workforce right in our faces, transitioned us into a basketball trash can, promoted our emasculating nicknames with a press release. Yes was not the boss, yet yes was also not the boss. At last, yes advanced to its level of incompetence. And this one is called The Real Problem. Our solution had class. Our solution had so much class, its Jumbotron said classy in neon green 25 feet high. Our solution had a quesadilla press. Our solution had a V8 Hammond. Because our solution had a hammer, everything looked like the problem. People blindfolded and spun dizzy by our solution pinned the problem on our predecessors. We regretted to inform people our solution came back more addictive and contagious and toxic than the problem, so we didn't. Instead, we said, there's a problem so long and loud that people saw, though we thought they didn't know the problem from a hole in the ground. We threw plastic bags and pesticides and denials in the hole until it became a real problem. Our solution threw money around, other people's money, of course. We said, they don't work of other people's solutions after we cracked their kneecaps in freak pickaxe accidents. The hole's ammonia and sulfur smell came from untapped gas reserves or hell. When people fell in with a helpful shove, we shoveled our solution over them and said, this is the hill you picked to die on, until they couldn't tell what direction was up and up. Our simple solution, gut solution, straight shooting solution, populist outsider solution, our solution that contained a hole within an even deeper hole. And just because I don't want to leave you with that, I'm going to read one personal poem to finish off. Not happy or anything, but it's not quite as angry as those. This one is also as autobiographical as I ever get. This is like, there's nothing that's even, not even poetic license. This is all straightforward, factual, which is good because once I wrote a poem about my extended family, and it made my grandmother cry because I took some poetic license with it, and she's in this poem, so she'd be glad it's all completely true. It's called Stop Me If You've Heard This Before. I'll never forget, my best friend says to start his favorite stories. I think, oh yes, you will. I can request authentication codes, and by the time I find my phone, wonder who texted and why. I've reported happenings to people who told me they happened and people they happened to. In my earliest memory, my grandfather and I caught a fish with another clinging to its tail, the flash of the second letting go and splashing back in the ocean, a shadow of an echo I believe I recall. Faded, almost translucent, my grandparents stand in a photo in their 80s in assisted living. A tremor of letters on the back says, "This is to remind you we weren't always as old as we will be." I called my parents old when they were in their 40s, same as I am now, that I know not to laugh if an elder asks, "How long are you here?" a third or fourth time. The final time I saw my grandmother, she told my uncle, "I know you're my son, but not which one." I heard she often asked for my grandfather, gone a decade by then. Months after her death, I dreamed she forgot who she was, and I repeated her name until she remembered, and my grandfather returned, and they left hand in hand. I only know because I wrote it in a bedside notebook when I woke. Thank you. Sorry, I have to put out a bunch of papers and bookmarks.
Steve, I think you may have taken my very important paper with you. That's okay. I wish that I had this memorized, but I do not.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. So I will say in this moment, I forgot at the beginning of this to say the most important thing, which is thank you, Steve and Eduardo, for being here. We are so excited to have you, and we are so excited that St. Louis is grabbed you. We've got you now. All right. So, Steve, thank you so much. I mean, that was really beautiful and funny and painfully funny. We have some similar obsessions. I went through I want to be a professional eater. And then I turned 30 and I couldn't eat a carb 3 hours before bed without not being able to sleep due to acid reflux. So I changed my mind. But I loved how all of that came in. That was really beautiful. Thank you. And I'm excited to introduce Eduardo. So my bio is not going to be quite as fun as Lizzie's, but it's a bio. All right. So nearly every bio that I find and found and read of Eduardo begins with Eduardo C. Corral is the son of Mexican immigrants. It is not an accident that this is so firmly pointed to in the descriptions of Eduardo and his poetry. It is his history. It is the history of many. This history is laid bare in poems that wind impeccably in narrative and lyric, that answer questions with more questions, that carve paths toward deeper understandings of identities both global and local, macro and micro, collective and individual. His poems lead the reader to a place of nuance. They tell us that what is seen and felt can be seen and felt again, differently, in a different light, with a different word or turn of phrase. Eduardo is the author of Guillotine and Slow Lightning, which won the Yale Series of Younger Poets competition. He's the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Lanham Foundation Literary Fellowship, a Whiting Writers Award, a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, a Hodder Fellowship from Princeton University. Leave some for the rest of us. He teaches in the MFA program at Washington University in St. Louis. Our city is lucky to have you, as well as your poetry and your history. Thank you for sharing some of it with us. Please help me welcome Eduardo C. Corral.
Can everybody, oh my goodness, can everybody hear me? How about now? Thank you, Bailey, for the lovely introduction. Lizzie, Aaron, everybody part of the St. Louis Poetry Center. It's a pleasure to be in the city, to be working at WashU. I think all my colleagues and students for being here, and everybody who loves, was intrigued by poetry, glad you're here. I'm going to begin, as I look for these two new poems, I always also thank Stephen for reading for us tonight. Me and Stephen became friends during the heyday of poetry blogging. Remember those days? A blog sometimes still gets me in trouble. Every once in a while I get an email from him. Remember when you said this? I'm like, I don't. I don't remember. I'm going to read two Nourish poems to start. Have a whole sequence of 14-liner poems that I'm working on. Maybe they're part of the third book, maybe they're not. I don't call these poems sonnets because, well, I'm not delusional, but they have a 14-line construction, which has been fruitful for me. The thing is, when you hit your 50s, your eyes go to pout. So let's see how this works out. I wrote this poem during the beginning of the pandemic, around March, April, when we were sheltering in place. One word that came to me when we all experienced that pandemic surge, the first wave of it, reminded me of another word that I associated with an earlier pandemic. So this poem is titled Lines Written During My Second Pandemic. All water flows toward loneliness. Loneliness is a black eye, a gleaming pit. We have yet to split loneliness like an atom. Loneliness arrives on a leash of scorpions. In my skull, loneliness opens like a parachute. It's illegal to chain loneliness to a fence. Flickers tunnel through loneliness to build nest. I sprinkle a spoon of sugar over loneliness. In some languages, loneliness isn't perfect. Antlers crown the bald head of loneliness. Like rough trade, loneliness won't kiss you. Loneliness is crouched in a tree, afraid of dirt. In the dark, loneliness ripens too quickly. Beneath the roof of loneliness, my blood drifts. The second newish poem is titled To a Blossoming Saguaro. I was born and raised in southern Arizona, surrounded by these gorgeous column-like cacti, tall, magnificent cacti that it takes up to 100 years to grow an arm, or what we call a spear. To a blossoming saguaro. You have kin in Mexico. Shooting you is called cactus flooding. Humidity and wind speed shape the path of a bullet. Your shadow will outlive my father. That's kind of comforting. Ghost-faced bats pollinate your dog-eared flowers, which smell like wet rope, melon. The sky is a century with no windows. I say things like that. Sorry. You have more rights than the undocumented. I need a permit to uproot you. Ophelia believes only rain can touch all of you. My mother is my favorite immigrant. After her, the sonnet. My first book came out in 2012, and the typescript is so small now. Look at this. It's ants. So see how this works. I'm gonna try to read poems I often don't read from Slow Lightning. It took me 9.5 years to finish my first book. So there are boxes and boxes in my parents' place of old yellow legal pads where I wrote down images and drafts and drafts. And when I got the call that this book had been selected for the specific prize, one thing I wanted to do is I wanted to go one more time through those boxes of notebooks. And I did, and I pulled out every line or phrase or image that resonated with me and stitched together a poem. Kind of a way to say thank you for the 9.5 years of those notebooks, that process, and something just new to put in the book. The poem is titled Self-Portrait with Tumbling and Lasso. Goodness gracious. It's almost like reading in a nightclub. Oh, Lord. 51 is not being kind to me. How about this? I'm drum roll. Can we move it here? Can we? Is there no way to increase the lights a bit?
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're right.
The good news is I have vision insurance at West Shoe. January. These eyes would be peaked at, and there would be a new frame, a new prescription in my life. Much better. Thank you.
Get the vision buy-up.
Self-portrait with tumbling and lasso. I'm drumroll and voyeur. I'm watermark and fable. I'm weaving the snarls of a wolf through my hair like ribbon. At my feet, chisels and jigsaws. I'm performing an autopsy on my shadow. My ribcage, a wall. My heart, a crack in a wall. A foothold. I am tumbling upward, a French acrobat. I am judder and effigy. I am pompadour and splendid. I'm spinning on spit, split in half. An apple in my mouth. I know what Eve didn't know. A serpent is a fruit eaten to the core. I'm a massacre of the dreamers. A terracotta soldier waiting for his emperor's return. When I bow, a black fish leaps from the small of my back. I catch it. I tear it apart. I fix the scales to my lips. Every word I utter is opalescent. I'm skinned and Orphic. I am scarlet and threshold. At my touch, a piano melts like a slab of black ice. I am snow. I am steam rising and dissipating. I'm a ghost undressing. I'm a cowboy riding bareback. My soul is whirling above my head like a lasso. My right hand, a pistol. My left, automatic. I'm knocking on every door. I'm coming on strong like a missionary. I'm kicking back my legs like a mule. I'm kicking up my legs like a showgirl. One of my favorite kind of poems to read is just lyric fragments of words and images and nouns and small ants of grammar just accumulating on the page. I tried to do that a couple of times in the first book. This is an ekphrastic poem. La Pelona, Mixed Media, Esther Hernandez, 1980. Fist device, skin trellis, pagan rubble, whistling ash. A phrase turning up the dark, salt rattle, Arctic ruka, centuries cut and crushed, cocaine terrace, thumbed gold, flock of knots, Chafoso grammar, woven moth dust, an egg cracking into Arabic, as pretty as a gust, Chiqueque's blood color, a fable braided and quickly dressed in milk, bone flour. Want. Abandoned by his coyote, my father, sand seething beneath his sneakers, trekked through southern Arizona, maze of acacia and cholla. Cold sweat cut his face like a razor. In his pocket, a fine-tooth comb, dice, and a photo of a girl playing a violin. On the third day, he picked up a rock, killed a blue lizard with a single strike. He tore it apart, shoved guts and bones into his mouth. The first time I knelt for a man, my lips pressed to his zipper, I suffered such hunger. Two of my favorite poets are, when I was working on this book, two of the poets who I love deeply and still love deeply, who shaped, I think, some of the crazy in my work, are the poets Beidou and Jean Valentine. After Beidou, after Jean Valentine. The skin of your deity smells like gasoline. Your prayers are added to the pyre, a gold wheel spinning. Once your voice broke out in a sweat, each word a salt lick. Their fingers rooting inside a violin, orchestral maneuvers. In the middle of the pandemic, you mistook a group of ghosts for an orchid, for an orchard. You, coward, fingers are rooting inside a violin to pull out the last scraps of birdsong, a gold wheel spinning in your mind like insomnia. Good. Now to a book with larger font. Thank goodness. That was tough. My apologies for that. One of the hearts of the second book is this notion of unrequited love. What happens to the lyric speaker where they desire somebody and they can return that desire, those feelings. It took me too long to actually find a way into this poem. So one way I figured out how to make the beloved a composite figure, half true, half invented. And I had to trust my process. I am a poet who does not like confessional work in my own work, right? I don't like the confessional mode to be very present in my poetry, though it feels or reads sometimes that confessionalism. For me, when my drafts get close to the real, the imagination leaps in. And by trusting that imagination to leap in, to take care of the wound, then the poem starts to happen in a way that actually surprised and enriched me. Autobiography of my hungers. His beard, an avalanche of honey, an avalanche of thorns. In a bar too close to the Pacific, he said, I don't love you, but not because I couldn't be attracted to you, liar. Even my soul is pot-bellied. Thinness in my mind echoes the gay men on the nightly news, hissed by death and public scorn. The anchorman declaring weight loss is one of the first symptoms. The Portuguese have a word for imaginary, never to be experienced love. Whoop-de-doo. I don't love you, he said. The words flung him back. In his eyes, I saw it. To another bar where a woman sidestepped his desire. Another hunger, our friendship. In 10th grade, weeks after my first kiss, my mother said, you're looking thinner. That evening, I smuggled a cake into my room. I ate it with my hands, licked buttercream off my thumbs until I puked. Desire with no future. Bitter longing. I starve myself by yearning for intimacy that doesn't and won't exist. Holding hands on a ferry, tracing with the tip of my tongue a jawline. In a bar too close to the Pacific, he said, I don't love you, but not because I couldn't be attracted to you. His beard, an avalanche of thorns, an avalanche of honey. This is the title poem from the second book, Guillotine, which came out in 2020. I often say this, the origins of this poem is I have the word guillotine in my head, and as most writers, most poets, we carry a word or image and we dwell on it and we put pressure on it, something else sparks, something else is given to you, and then you can start thinking more deeply, the cascading the writing process can cascade forward, can move forward. For some reason, the word refused to give me any kind of spark. It just rattled in my skull for months. So guillotine. I sat down at a coffee shop in Jackson Heights, Queens, and by hand, I wrote out the word guillotine in a page of my notebooks. Filled it up, the whole page with my cursor. Then I looked at the page and said, what do you see in that tangle of your penmanship? I saw scorpions, and then I saw something else. Guillotine. The scorpions always arrive at dawn. Gently, the pincers touch the cuts on my lips. I clutch the edges of the mattress, stare at the mirrored ceiling. My mouth opens, but no sound staggers out. The scorpions, dark green, dank, reach in, pull out the razor blade under my tongue. Two scorpions, a razor blade, slowly, in unison, without letting go of the metal, they move. A little guillotine making its way down my body. I remember dragging my thumb through his beard, coppery and difficult. The scorpions pause, tilt the blade, a threat, a reminder. It's my past to stop yearning for as long as it takes them to carry a blade across my skin. My thoughts swerve from monsoon storms to accordions to pecan groves. The little guillotine starts moving again. I began to sense the enormity of my body. The blade high in the air, for now. This next poem is titled Sentence, another failed sonnet. But in failure, you find beautiful things, right? I have to think of my work as failure because I was caught up in the notion of having a perfect first book, writing a perfect poem in those first years of writing my first book, Slow Lightning. And when I realized each book needs its peaks and valleys, right? That things don't work out. When things don't work out on the page, they teach you way more about your aesthetics, your language, when they actually kind of do work out on the page. Sentence. I crawl back. He unpacks his tools, oils the wooden handles, rinses the metal. Fragrant his thighs, fragrant his sneer. Coy and eternity inked on his skin. An ecstatic blue, a bewildered green. Some wounds are ovals, some wounds are opals. The ears of a white wolf pivot toward the moon. I flee now and then, alone in the desert for months. A nomad in a kimono, a pressed together dust. Beautiful his throat, his words even more beautiful. It's my turn to ask for a bit more from you. He likes it when I bleed. Strangers, once. Gently, he hammers gold into a sentence. Gently, the sentence enters me. When the book came out, my oldest nephew at the time asked me, what is that poem about? I have no idea. No clue, buddy. Most poets give you a two poem morning ending. I'm gonna give you a 3 poem morning, just to break it up a bit. Questions for my body. Why are you nocturnal? How many cathedrals have you entered? Has cruelty ever saved you? Do you remember the length of his thumbs? Isn't that enough cake? Have you ever soaked your feet in gasoline? Do you still fear the virus? How can you sleep in this heat? Is that a soul patch? Do you laugh or cry at Keats' grave? Have you been claimed? This poem is in 2 parts. I was very interested in kind of yoking together associative logic, frenzy, a lot of leaping in the first part, and in the second part, stillness, being anchored to the earth. What happens to the lyric space when you yoke those 2 kind of energy and non-energy together? In the first book and the second book, there is each a chain, a little catalog of words that I can't pronounce. just to keep myself humble, to remind myself there's no mastery over language, and just to annoy myself in the future. And the first part of the poem is a chain of medical terms. The title comes from Emerson, and the ending paraphrases something said by Saint Augustine. Around every circle, another can be drawn. 1. In 10th grade, I kissed the guy who called me a faggot once or twice a week. I still see his voice. 6 hummingbirds nailed to a wall. In an olive grove outside of Fuente Grande in 1936, a teacher, 2 bullfighters, and Federico Garcia Lorca were shot to death by fascist soldiers. During the Reagan years, I sweated out new language, capsi sarcoma, ferbil, oro candaces. Last summer in Sevilla, I flirted with a stranger. He pinched my belly, walked away laughing. Later, along Calle Arjona, a remix of Girls Just Want to Have Fun poured out of a passing taxi cab. Shut the fuck up, Cyndi Lauper yelled. Mala copa, joder. The soldier who shot Lorca bragged he fired 2 bullets into his ass for being queer. For years, I desired a man who didn't desire me. He was gentle with my lust. I never thanked him. I'm thanking him now. But once, in a splinter-rich booth, he held my hand, a kindness I can't forgive. 2. Diminished but quick, I sprint into the desert toward a dust devil slowly twisting along a canal. I step into the grit and whirl, not dust after all, but a spiral of locusts, each a coil of gold oiled with honey. Long hind legs click, click, click. Not one skims my skin. A thunderhead on the horizon shimmers. Half-built cathedral. What a saint said about God, I believe about loneliness. A circle whose center is everywhere, and its circumference nowhere. That, if you're one of my students, is water. Okay, I went in with a persona poem. And I would make it an argument, even my eye-centric poems are persona poems at the end of the day, which I think gives me a lot more freedom to investigate the wound, to get closer to, what I can't forget. The person speaking in this poem is a Mexican-American Border Patrol agent in his 40s, thinking about his father, his family, as he sits in a Jeep doing his job. And I tried to write this poem for my first book, but I never got it right. And looking back, one of the reasons I didn't get it right, because I was scared of writing it, right? So I knew maybe, if I'm too scared for the first book, maybe with the second book, I'll have a bit more courageous. Border Patrol agent. Summer is a puta. I park beneath branches, crank up the AC in the Jeep. I hate the rearview mirror. It makes me look like my father, chased and singed. Last week, beneath the sky, Walmart blue, in a clearing full of bottle, sneakers, teepee rolls, I found a body. Legs gnawed to the knees, barbed wire tight around the throat. I remembered graffiti on a boulder. God is always hungry. Sometimes, with binoculars, I watch wild horses hurry through the heat. Once, a yearling stopped mid-gallop, then collapsed into a bed of clothes the rain could not extinguish. The radio is always crackling. 6 wets, sighted on infrared, need a stick speaker, stat. I only speak Spanish with my father. He often mistakes blue parakeets perched on the stove for gas flames. Last July, far from Tucson, I found a rape tree. Torn panties draped on branches, the tree a warning, a way for smugglers to claim terrain. Lightning climbs a hillside like a stilt walker. Rain strikes the windshield. I think of my wife asleep on her side, breasts pressed together as if one were dreaming the other. Her womb empty, my dick useless. There are things I just can't tell her. Sometimes only body parts remain. They're buried in baby caskets. Gracias. Thank you for your attention.
Eduardo, thank you. I am going to plot myself down and ask them a couple of questions, and then I will open it up for 2 or 3 audience questions. I would love if you thought of it. Let's see if I can make this work. I break technology by not breaking my bases. That's my superpower. Yeah. Okay. So, this is a question that I would hate to be asked, but I love it and I love hearing the answers to it. So to both of you, what are your memories of your first journeys into intentional writing? And what did that look like for you? I know that could probably be an entire dissertation, but I think at least for myself and with poets I've talked to, there's kind of a pivot moment when you realize like, oh shit, I'm writing. And so I'm curious what that looked like for you.
All right. My first intentional writing was not poetry at all. I wrote a lot of prose. I thought I was going to be an author of fantasy novels. And you can still see that in a lot of my poems. But poetry, so it turns out when I tried to write short stories, and this will still happen when I try to write short stories, they would always turn into weird little poems instead. And at some point I realized, okay, this is like, even if I want to do this other thing, this is what they want to be, this is what I'm really good at, and this is how it's going to be. And so yeah, I almost exclusively write poetry at this point, and that was kind of the way I got there.
For me, maybe it wasn't probably a question of writing poetry with intention. It was using language with intention for the first time in my life. I'm dyslexic, so undiagnosed for most of my education experience. So I spent 5th, 6th grade, middle school, all high school developing different strategies to make the language on the page stop squiggling, to make those vowels stop leaping into other words or just disappearing. I would take a bookmark, place it lengthwise on a page of text and slow down each line. So I just took in one line of text at a time. So I had to develop all these strategies to navigate, to glean sense-making from the page. But at Arizona State University, I signed up for a Mexican American literature course, and there was a poetry workshop in the middle of the semester, which I almost dropped, but that's a story for another day. But I kept that class, and I wrote my first poems as undergrad. And I found myself using the same strategies, the same patience I had with language to start writing poetry. Right? It was a pivot, using these strategies and patience, not to just glean sense-making from a page, but start making my own sense, right? To be creative with a language, right? That's when I first began to use language with intention, right? And that just started the ball rolling.
I could ask both of you questions all day, and I want to ask a million questions about craft, and I will probably do that at some point in time. So, check your inboxes or don't, you can avoid them too, but, I think Lizzie brought it up a lot, and I think it always comes up for me in this space, and it's something that I value so much, and I know so much of us in this room do. And as teachers, as, journal makers, as community builders. I think it's very easy to think and see and feel poetry as a solo sport, but in my heart, it is so not. And I'm curious about your urgency to be in poetry community and the importance of it as you see it.
For me, at this stage in my writing life and my professional life, what matters that my work is out in the world is fine, but I have no illusions about my work sustaining itself after I'm gone or being ever present. That doesn't matter to me anymore, right? I'm interested in writing the poems I can, book by book, and trying to get better with my language. What matters to me is the work of my students finds a place in the world, that their language, their voices, their speakers echo in the atmosphere, find a place in the world. That's what matters to me the most, right? And this, whatever legacy I might have, I try to think of it as a legacy of a professor, a mentor, right? Okay, that's the way I was mentored. My mentor is Eduardo Gonzalez, and he taught me so many things by his presence and example. From the basic things like, what is my CV? What should I do now with my CV at this stage of my career? How do I write a letter of recommendation now that I'm tenured for another colleague? Basic things like that, right? I've been mentored continuously, right? And that's what I try to do in the world, right? To be a good mentor and professor, right? That matters to me in the way, right? And what I always tell my students, go in search of communities, not competition. Right? You need communities, plural, continuously to surround yourself, right? If you want to think about competition, if you want to freeze yourself, if you want to really be scared by competition, don't think of that person next to you in workshop. Think of silence, think of void, think of time. That should scare you.
Yeah, I think obviously there is some sort of kernel of writing that for me is completely solitary. There is the very base level of it where I'm just writing by myself, for myself. But if that were it, I don't think I would be doing it. So much of what I get out of it is hearing what other people have to say, what they've written and what they think about poetry. The time that I get to share with my writing group, Kenneth and Aaron and Lizzie and everyone, that just, whether we're talking about each other's poems or just talking about poetry in general. And so a lot of the reason that I'm always editing a literary journal is that, I get to read other people's poems, and sometimes I get to read other people's really amazing poems that I wouldn't have gotten to read otherwise. And then because I've built these journals up, I get to share them with a wider audience. And so it's good for everyone. And that really is sustaining when you're feeling a little bit lonely about the poetry.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I want to open it to 2, 3 max audience questions. Be brave, project your voice. Yes.
I have a question for Stephen. You said that you are pretty good at writing poetical poems, and I agree.
Thank you.
But what makes for a successful political poem?
So what makes for a successful political poem? Steve, tell us.
That's a very good question. I was actually talking with Eduardo a little bit about this yesterday. What I would say is, as an editor of a journal now, the literary magazine that I currently edit, we state we are an anti-capitalist journal. And even though we don't specifically publish political poetry, the fact that we say that leads to a lot of writers sending us political poems. And the one thing for sure that I would say is make the poem poetic, make it subtle, make it not just stating the thing you want to state, because I get so many poems there where the sentiments in them are admirable. I agree with them 100%, but there's nothing poetic about how they're written. They could basically be opinion pieces in a newspaper. So when I try to write political poetry, and there are many different ways to do it, but what I generally try to do is, number one, use humor. Number two, be unreal in some way, like it's about a real situation, but I'm not simply restating the real situation. I'm coming up with something absurd or, in some way trying to take the reader aback a little bit. So that's what I think about it. Do you want to take it a shot?
You got it. All right.
Yes. Ted, Mathis.
I'm interested in Eduardo and you have a poem that references Lorca, and you mentioned Lorca, and there's something in your stated distaste for traditional confessionalism and seeing scorpions in your own handwriting. I'm just curious if you can talk a little bit about Lorca. Is he an important poet for you, and if so, how?
Yeah.
It's just gonna hold it like it's my baby.
I mean, I think it's obvious. I mean, if you read the first two books, Lorca is a foundational figure for me, because I discovered him early on in my writing life. Right, started writing poetry as an undergrad, and my professor who said, "You're a poet now, so you should be reading poetry." Never dawned on me you should write poetry and read it. So he gave me a list of poets to check out, right? So I went to the library, I did that thing, and I fell in love with poetry. But then I kept returning to the library, finding different parts of the library where books of poems were. And I remember in my junior year at Arizona State University discovering a translated volume of Lorca's work. And something just happened to my mind. It felt both familiar and strange. Those fireworks went off in my head when I read an image, a phrase, even in translation. And when I read the original Spanish, the delight, the bewilderment, and pleasure was amplified. All right, so I loved that, right? But reading Lorca and reading people like Derek Walcott, right? This is a horrible thing to say, right? I admired them. I was like, wow. And then audacity set in. What can I do? All right? And what can I do after reading Lorca? Right? Well, how can he kind of shape my work? How can I push against it too in different ways? But how can his guiding spirit, right, be there? Right? For me, his guiding spirit is at the level of image and phrase making. Right? I think I take some of it from him. I might be wrong. I find poets can't really pinpoint their influences in a way that's very articulate, but I think that's what's happening with Lorca. And I have a very kind of special relationship with him. Every time I go to Madrid, I get a hotel close to one of the statues that I have, right? And every day I make a little circle print around the statue. And then I go touch his hand. And then I go have a glass of wine for him somewhere, right? So even Lorca, my obsession with Lorca is embedded in my travels too. When I'm in Madrid, I stay close to one of the two Lorca statues and I commune with it.
I saw you, Kenneth.
Oh,
It'll be our last question.
Sure. Well, another question for Eduardo. I'm curious about the sonnet. You mentioned a couple times the sonnet, but usually, I don't write sonnets. These are 14 lines, but they're not sonnets. So I'm just curious about your relationship to the sonnet and how it informs your non-sonnets, I guess.
I mean, in the States, in America, we have this long tradition of American sonnet. So I think my sonnets take part of that tradition of American sonnet. When I jokingly say, they're not sonnets, I mean, you can think of them as sonnets. So I think I'm doing certain work with a vota in those 14-liners. I keep that interests me. It's the vota that I kind of am fascinated by in these 14-line poems I'm writing into the day. But my anxiety about not calling them a sonnet is quite honestly rooted in anxiety in writing a third book. I have no idea what the third book is going to be or what the wheels are leading me toward. So the anxiety I have about the new material is rooted in me not really knowing what the third book is going to feel and read like. My first two books are kin, they're holding hands, and I keep saying I want the third book to be a stranger to the first two, but I have no idea what that means yet, right? So I'm still working toward that at the end of the day. But sonnets, not sonnets, they're just little 14-liners. I mean, Diane Seuss just taught us, right? A sonnet can be more than one thing, right? Again, the long experimental history of the American sonnet. Right.
Thank you so much. Both of you, thank you again, really. It's an honor to have you here. And again, the city, we get you. We're gonna claim you for a while, at least. And yeah, thank you all for being here. I have my little, it says, Bailey will wrap it up, everyone will smile, buy books, and go home. So please do buy books, really. Definitely buy books. Have a little drink, get your book signed, talk to the poets, talk to each other. And again, books are on sale, Left Bank. Awesome. Please, if you would like, become a member of the St. Louis Poetry Center. You can start at $5 a month. That's how Lizzie started back in the day. Thank you again to our funders and our partners. Thanks again to Erin, Dana, the rest of the St. Louis Poetry Center Program Committee and the board. We love you. There are some upcoming events, SLPC events and community poetry events in town. I'll rattle off just a few of them real quick. So tomorrow, November 19th, there are a couple at Left Bank Books. Mary Jo Bang and Yuki Tanaka are going to be reading. Mary Jo, you're here. Yes. Hello. Hi. Yes. Hi. Yuki as well. Look at us. How amazing. And also, there is a reading at Fortune Teller Bar, Reborn, with Jetmar and Kenneth Pruitt. And there will be an open mic after those two featured readers. Friday, December 13th, St. Louis County Library, Billy Collins for Water in conversation with Mary Jo Bang. Sunday, January 19th, we will have our Sunday workshop. Elena, where are you? Elena's been putting in a lot of work curating for the Sunday workshop. And that will be with Shane Seeley. And then Tuesday, January 28th, I say we, I'm just a we. I'm part of all of you. And so it'll be Poetry at the Point, Jennifer Whalen, and then the other poet is to be determined. And I will also say, we are very excited. Observable will be hosting Allison Rollins and Jackie Germain in February. So please remember that. Thank you again for coming out. Hilo, thank you. Thank you to our awesome Hilo folks. I appreciate you. We appreciate you. You make it so that we can be here. And thank you so much. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you all.